Hi everyone, my name is Salina and I'm joined here today with Dina, Nebay, and Senait, and we're here to talk to you about Eritrea's incredible natural resources, the environment. So we all love our country, its food, our culture, but it's also important to understand the environment and the land that we have, and how managing this environment and our relationship with it is crucial for our future. Environmental policies and laws are incredibly important for reducing poverty, improving well-being, and securing sustainable development. There are many actions being taken in Eritrea, but today we want to cover three topics: food, land, and water. So the first, food, includes agriculture and the basic right to food. And the second, land, we'll talk about regreening, which are efforts to plant trees. So plants are really important for healthy soil as they retain water and supply nutrients which help us grow our food. And the last topic is water. We're going to talk a bit about sanitation and then the use of dams and ponds for healthy drinking water and agriculture. We'll share what's been done pre-independence, post-independence, and also touch on the plans for the future. So why food, land, and water? So the first thing that's important to note is that there is climate change, and Eritrea is very vulnerable to climate change due to its location and its geography. And to just give you a quick recap, essentially there are increasing global temperatures because of greenhouse gas emissions. This happens when we drive our cars or we use gas for energy. And when it comes to Eritrea, this is going to show up quite specifically in increasing droughts and having varying rainfall. Some years will have too much, some years will have too little. It'll make our existing problems with soil erosion and deforestation a lot worse. So the second aspect to think about are the ways of living. So how are Eritrean families living? 70% of them currently rely on farming for food. And this is mainly traditional rain-fed agriculture, which is very vulnerable to the climate. So this brings me to the second point, which is really on resilience. This is really about enhancing our resilience as a people and a country to adapt to a changing environment. And for this, we need sustainable practices in these three topics. So to give you a quick overview of Eritrea's ecology, it's a hot and really arid climate. It receives an average annual rainfall of less than 350 millimeters. So this means there are no permanent rivers and there are very long dry seasons. So the picture to the right shows you how forest cover has changed dramatically. About a century ago, it was estimated that we had 30% cover, and today we have less than 1%. And the reason for this is twofold. One is climatic, which we discussed earlier, and the second is human practices that are unsustainable. So this could be cutting wood for fuel, clearing land for agriculture, or overgrazing, which is when cattle, cows, and sheep eat too much on the same plot of land for too long. And it's important to note that past wars have also had a substantial impact on that. So what can we do about this? It's really important that we combine Eritrea's rich local and traditional knowledge with that of science as we consider our planning. So the government has over 30 national policies, strategies, frameworks that give guidance to these three topics. And this spans, the Ministry of Land, Water, Environment, Ministry of Energy, of Agriculture. What's shown here is just a little snapshot of some of the plans, but if you're interested, there's a lot more for you to dive into. So there's a whole of government approach really when it comes to reducing climate change, impacts on population, environment, and economy. So before I hand over to Dina, I just wanted to touch on regional cooperation because it's important for us to take a step back and think about Eritrea in relation to the African continent. The problems that we face are also huge key issues in the region. So the African Union has recently launched a Great Green Wall initiative, which is created to stop desertification, so the expanding desert, which takes healthy land and turns it into desert. So the plan at the moment is to build a mosaic of green and productive landscapes from Senegal all the way to Eritrea and Djibouti. So this is something that the country has been working with UN agencies and with all of civil society to really implement the sustainability plans. So some of the key initiatives are May 15th, there's National Regreening Day in Eritrea, and there's also the Student Summer Regreening Campaign, Karamtawi Matot, which happens every summer. So this is a really key piece in regreening, and I'll hand it over now to Dina for a deeper dive into land.
Thank you, Salina. So my name is Dina, and I'm going to give us a better understanding of land in Eritrea by talking about how Eritrean land has historically been seen as valuable, beginning with the modern historical period. So with Italian colonization in 1890. So for Italians, securing the Eritrean territory as their colony was a really excellent opportunity to expand their economic influence on the African continent. And Eritrea's location on the Red Sea coastline, its proximity to the Arab world, and its position right around the corner from the Indian Ocean was prime. They really took their time using Eritrean people to build up infrastructures and industries from the ground up and discover the rich material resources that Eritrea had to offer. While in Eritrea, the Italians played a role in establishing oil rigs and a railway that connected the highlands to the lowlands. These, of course, were not for Eritreans' benefits, but for their long-term enjoyment and prosperity in what they thought was going to be their continued colony of lovely Eritrea. Well, the British came and took away this fantasy from the Italians, and the British really saw Eritrea as an important military location and base during World War II. So in this way, nearly zero development occurred in Eritrea under the British. In fact, when the British left, they bitterly destroyed land infrastructures and shipped valuable pieces to their other colonies for their economic gain. Next slide. So the next phase of Magzati, or foreign control, that Eritreans experienced was through the Ethiopian monarchy under Emperor Haile Selassie. So this form is called expansionist imperialism because it was a neighboring African country that wanted political, economic, and territorial control over Eritrea. The Ethiopian imperial project was one that envisioned Eritrea being absorbed into Ethiopia so as to take advantage of Eritrea's natural resources, the land, biodiversity, and minerals. This included things like gold, oil, natural gas, petroleum, and potash, just to name a few things. And under Ethiopian administration, any kind of land infrastructural development was reversed, either through policies that neglected this important area or through warfare. Nebay is going to talk a little bit more about this and expand on this later on in his discussion on food security. But a really good question to think about is, how can you farm if there are bombings and landmines in the fields? Next slide. So using a human-centered approach to solving our challenges as a country has always been the way forward for the government of Eritrea from the very beginning. This is the way that we can sustainably repair our land, not just for short-term benefits, but for the generations of Eritreans to come. And this is why investing in our people and equipping our people with skills and expertise is critical, not just taking out ridiculous amounts of loans that would take decades to pay back to the IMF that we actually cannot afford. Next slide. So, of course, the big question is, what are the central areas of focus for us in order to rehabilitate our land? So one of them, the first one that I'll talk about, is agricultural development. We need to stop land degradation. We need to help reverse any kinds of unhealthy consequences of war and of difficult political situations that have made our land in an unhealthy situation. The second thing we can do is to adapt to climate change by using farming practices that are climate smart. Next, we can focus on land resource development. This means that we are treating our existing land resources like coal, copper, natural gas, etc., right, by not overexploiting them and also encouraging the further development of them in a healthy and sustainable way. Next slide. The third thing we can do is focus on forestry development. And this is something Salina already kind of touched on, but it's especially important for rural populations who are very dependent on things like wood for making traditional homes, for use of charcoal, and for creating barriers in irrigation canals. We need to transition to energy saving technologies, for example, like a solar mogogo, and also for reforestation efforts. Next slide. And finally, we absolutely need to prioritize peace, which is crucial to rehabilitating our land. When our country is at peace and not at war, we can actually focus on environmental health without distraction. And the reason for that is that warfare directly negatively affects land through bombings and artillery fighting. And they have an indirect effect because people can't farm peacefully when national security isn't guaranteed. So this is something that Nebay is going to expand on in the next section.
Thank you, Dina. My name is Nebay, and I'm going to talk about food security in Eritrea. What is food security? According to the United Nations Committee on World Food, food security is having physical, social, economic access by all people at all times to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to lead a healthy and productive life. The right to a standard of living for health and well-being, including food, is recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. An effective food security strategy will ensure both national food security as well as the household food security. National food security is where food is available in market throughout the country for domestic production, commercial imports, or food assistance. And household food security is where all household members have affordable access at all times to the food they need for a healthy life. Food insecurity arises from a lack of both national and household capacity to produce or procure adequate quality and quantity food. Food security in Eritrea. Generally, Eritrea is a food insecure country. Most Eritreans are poor, unable to obtain sufficient food in terms of calories intake, especially the population living in rural areas of the country. Annual crop production depends on rainfall that is variable and unevenly distributed from year to year. War and frequent drought combined with population growth have reduced food production. The impact of war on food security in Eritrea. After 6 years of steady improvement in Eritrea's economy from 1991 to 1997, two decades-long border dispute with neighboring Ethiopia from 1998 to 2018 had a significant adverse impact on the living conditions of the people. Large tracts of fertile land and pastures in the border areas remained inaccessible for farming due to militarization. The agricultural activity near the border had totally stagnated, and the majority of the people who resided there had been displaced because of the war. The conflict also resulted in mass displacement of nearly 1 million Eritreans residing especially in the agricultural areas of Gashbarka and Dubub region. The impact of drought on food security in Eritrea. Agricultural drought occurs when water supply is insufficient to cover crop or livestock water requirements. Eritrea is one of the drought-prone sub-Saharan nations in Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, the number of undernourished people has increased by 45% since 2012, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. In Eritrea, several rounds of drought over the last 30 years threatened the lives of more than one-third of Eritrea's population. An almost complete absence of rain seriously undermined agricultural production, even in the most fertile areas of the country. During drought years, crop production dropped sharply, availability of seeds reduced significantly, and affected subsequent planting seasons. A significant number of livestock died or were sold off by farmers to mitigate the adverse impacts of the drought. The impact of sanctions on food security in Eritrea. Some studies show that the imposition of sanctions has deleterious effect on food security. Sanctions significantly increases the composite index of global hunger index and also adversely affect the availability and stability dimensions of food security. And the United Nations Security Council imposed two rounds of unjust sanctions on Eritrea in 2009 and 2011 through resolutions 1907 and to 2023, respectively. As said by Minister Yamana Gebremeskel, although often overlooked or downplayed, the economic ramifications of sanctions have been severe, entailing deleterious impact on investment, higher costs of capital for commercial loans, higher shipping or insurance costs, and barriers to imports, etc. Food security strategy in Eritrea. Government's long-term objective or vision is that to make food of sufficient quantity and acceptable quality readily accessible to all at an affordable price at any time and place within the country. The principles that underpin the vision are that national food security depends on the ability to increase production levels, the ability to increase purchasing power or incomes of the people from farm and non-farm sources, as well as the ability to increase the adequacy of and effectiveness of the food assistance program as a means of last resort to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Senait, and I'll be talking about the dams that we have built in Eritrea and the different initiatives that we have been working on regarding water sanitation. So let's start off with the history of water when it pertains to Eritrea. Eritrea's coastline is about 2,234 kilometers long. In 1869, Giuseppe Sapito purchased the port of Asab in November from Dutankal leaders, and in 1885, Italian troops landed in Asab and Massawa and moved inland towards the highlands. After Eritrea was forcefully federated with Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was actually quoted saying, "We need its land," which is Eritrea, and not its people, which is the Eritrean people. And in 1976, the TPLF created a manifesto outlining and defining many things. One was a geographical dream of a greater Tigray, which many of us call Hilmi Abai Tigray, which included taking land from the southern parts of Eritrea and Asab. Let's talk about the importance of dams. So dams are pretty important because they provide water for everyday use, such as water for drinking, cooking, bathing, washing, and everything else that falls in between. Micro dams also allow families in rural towns and villages in Eritrea to walk a shorter distance to get water, and it also boosts income for farmers, which improves food security at the same time. How do dams work? So during times of excess water flow, dams store water, then releases the water during times of low flow when basically there is not enough water to meet its demands. And many of us know, due to the Horn of Africa being a hotspot for droughts, building dams actually would help relieve this issue, which is why we believe countries such as Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and even Djibouti should build dams around their respective countries. And in 1991, believe it or not, Eritrea only had fewer than 100 dams and water reservoirs. And today we have more than 900 around the country. In addition to building hundreds of dams across the country, safe drinking water has increased from 7% in 1991 to 95% in 2021. You'll also see I've added some information about where the dams and microdams are located throughout the country. There's many dams and microdams located in the Ansaba region, in Gashbarka, the southern region, central region, and the northern Red Sea. Lastly, sanitation practices and initiatives. So let's start with explaining what open defecation is. So the act of open defecation is essentially using the bathroom outside in public instead of using the toilet. I think many of us have done this when we kind of go outside of Asmara or we visit some family members in the rural parts. So essentially everyone in Eritrea has practiced open defecation once in their life. But this action actually causes a vicious cycle of diseases and poverty. And in areas with open defecation, they actually have higher rates of death for children under the age of 5, and they also have high levels of malnutrition and poverty. According to the 2010 Eritrea Population and Health Survey, it showed that sanitation in Eritrea improved by 11.3%, and as of December 2018, 994 villages, which is roughly 30% of all villages, have declared open defecation free. Lastly, practicing open defecation actually declined in Eritrea from 90% to 70%, which shows the potential for growth. Eritrea has made progress in providing water and sanitation for all its people. 54% of communities have achieved open defecation-free status, while more than 50% of schools and health facilities have wash services. The Eritrean government has constantly emphasized the importance of health and water sanitation. Minister Gebel Selassie expressed the government's commitment to implementing the One Wash strategy and investment plan as one of its top national priorities to ensure the availability of adequate wash services to all of its citizens by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senait, for covering the last topic on water. So you might all be wondering, where do we go from here? We've given you a quick snapshot, but there's so much work left to be done. So what's shown here are just a few of the targets that the government has set to accomplish by 2030 in the areas of food, land, and water. There's so much that's happening here, from dams to irrigation or animal production. So we hope that you've learned something new and you've learned about the importance of a sustainable environment for Eritrea, and that this has inspired you to learn more. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.